All right, so when you think of Emily Dickinson, what's the first image that comes into your head? For most of us, for generations really, it's been the poet in white, this fragile woman who retreated from the world, a literary hermit whispering poems to herself in a locked room in Amherst. It's one of the most enduring myths in American literature, romantic, tragic, and, well, as it turns out, just not true.
Exactly. It's an image we've been sold for over a century. And the scholarship that propped up that image, it was mostly built on one source,
Yeah.
the 1958 edition of her letters. But now, in 2024, we have this completely definitive revolutionary revision of that work. It just resets the whole record.
And that's our deep dive for today. We're going to unpack this massive new collection of her correspondence because the myth of the isolated recluse, it just can't hold up anymore. The single biggest takeaway here is that she was not an isolated, lonely woman. Far from it.
So far from it. I mean, this new edition shows she was one of the most prolific and engaged communicators of her time. She was living fully within the stream of what was happening, personally, politically, in her town, in her country. It's a total reframing. We're replacing the secluded genius with a real woman who actively, cherished her connections.
Which makes so much sense when you think about it. She was a letter writer long before anyone knew she was a poet. The very first piece of writing we have from her, and the very last one. Both letters. It was fundamental to who she was.
It was everything to her. She got the power of sending a message, not just writing it down. She famously wrote, not once but twice, that a letter is a joy of earth, it is denied the gods. So this wasn't some backup plan for socializing. For her, it was this ecstatic form of connection.
Okay, let's unpack this with the numbers then. If the 1958 edition was the standard for so long, what's the scale of this expansion? How much new material are we really talking about?
Well, the scale fundamentally changes everything. The 1958 edition had 1,049 letters from Dickinson, this new 2024 edition. It has 3,304.
Wow! That's a huge jump. That must be decades of discoveries and, I imagine, painstaking re-editing.
It is. Since the 50s, editors have found or radically re-edited at least 80 documents. And this is crucial. It's not just her side of the story anymore. This new edition includes all the existing letters Dickinson received.
Oh, that's a game changer. So you're not just hearing her broadcast out, you're hearing the conversation.
Exactly. You see her as a node in a network. He was an engaged recipient, reacting, responding, not just sending things into a void.
That detail alone complicates the whole narrative. But let's get to what scholars are calling the most radical change, this idea of the letter poem. What is that, and why does it matter so much?
This part is truly revolutionary. So a letter poem is basically a poem she sent with no other prose. It might have a signature, maybe an address, but the poem was the message. A quick thank you, a note of condolence, just a little check-in.
So it's like poetry as instant messaging, almost.
That's a great way to put it. Now, the 1958 edition, it included 24 of these. Ready for the jump. The 2024 edition includes an additional 214 letter poems.
Wait, 214? So 214 more poems were actually functioning as day-to-day communication.
Yes. It means we have to completely rethink how she viewed poetry. It wasn't just this high art thing she did in private. It was part of her social toolkit. The lines were totally blurred for her. She'd embed poems and letters, mix lines from different poems, send the same lines to different people, sometimes as verse, sometimes as prose. The rhythm was just her natural way of talking.
And you can see her personality in them, too. I love the detail about her signing them with nicknames.
Oh, totally. She'd sign a note to her sister-in-law Susan as Easter, or call her brother Austin Oliver. It just confirms these weren't formal compositions. They were acts of daily affection. They were meant to delight right there in the moment. If you've ever struggled to connect her poetry to her life, these letter poems are the bridge.
That's fantastic. So let's talk about that life. The editor of the 1958 edition, he famously said Dickinson did not live in history.
Yeah.
This new volume just demolishes that, right? What did her community actually look like?
Well, that myth comes from a 20th century idea of the nuclear family. But she was in a dense 19th century social network, and that meant constant engagement. People weren't just dropping by for coffee. They were living with the Dickinsons for weeks, months, sometimes years.
Can you give us an example of that?
Absolutely. Her cousins, Anna and Clara Newman, lived with her brother Austin and his wife Susan for 11 years.
11 years.
Right. And Emily herself traveled a lot more than the myth suggests, at least until 1865. She had those long stays in Cambridge for eye treatments. She wasn't just stuck in her room.
And the family was central to Amherst society? They weren't on the fringes?
Not at all. They were the definition of the local elite. Her father, Edward, was a major lawyer and politician. And Susan, her sister-in-law, hosted these famous salons. We're talking guests like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Harriet Beecher Stowe.
So her social network was incredibly impressive.
It was prestigious and it was national. Her correspondents were major figures.
Mm.
Civil War, Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson, the hugely popular novelist Helen Hunt Jackson, who actually wanted to be her literary executor, Samuel Bowles, the editor of the Springfield Republican, Massachusetts Supreme Court Justice Otis Lord. And the thing is, she addressed them with the confidence of an equal.
You can't be a timid recluse and do that.
No.
You just can't.
So we have this high-level intellectual network. But the letters also show her connected to just everyday life. Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't all parlor talk.
And that's where the new annotation work is so brilliant. Her letters are filled with local news births, deaths, the circus coming to town, fires, local scandals. The editors also made a point to identify women by their own names, like Elizabeth Holland, not just Mrs. Josiah Holland. It gives them back their identity. And they track her interactions with everyone, shopkeepers, farmers, the people who worked for the family.
There's that one incredibly moving anecdote that just brings it all home. Oh, it really does. It's from 1882. She was terrified that her dear friend, Otis Lord, was dying. And she wrote that she found comfort when she ran to the blue jacket of an Irish laborer who worked on their property, a man named Thomas Kelly. And she recorded what he said to her. He said, "He will be better. Don't cry, Miss Emily. I could not see you cry."
Wow. Just that one detail, a woman of her class in that moment of crisis, running to a paid laborer for comfort and getting it.
It encapsulates a whole new picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These are not the actions of an isolated woman. Even later in life, when she did stop seeing visitors, she was in constant contact. In 1884 alone, she sent 86 letters to 34 people. Almost 50 of those were directly responding to events in their lives. Thanks, condolences, congratulations. She was paying close attention.
Okay, so we have more letters, we have a richer context, but a huge part of this project is editorial archaeology, right? Uncovering secrets hidden by past editors.
This is where you see how fragile the historical record really is. You have to ask, what happens when the first editor is also part of the story? We're talking about Mabel Loomis Todd. Now, she did an immense service collecting the letters in the 1890s, but she also made changes. And this new edition reveals the shocking extent of those changes.
The old assumption was that the ellipses, the little dots in the letters, meant the recipient had cut something out, right? Something too private.
That was the convenience story, yes. But the new manuscript work shows that's not true. The ellipses were Todd's. She was the one marking things for omission.
Wait, so she was actively cutting material out of her own transcriptions. To what end? What was she hiding?
She was shaping the story. Sometimes it was small things, like she took out a phrase where Dickinson mentioned housework, and I'm washing the dishes for her. Probably thought it was beneath a great poet. But more seriously, she cut text that was unflattering to Austin Dickinson, who was her lover, or that mentioned his wife Susan, in a way that complicated her own narrative.
That's a massive revelation. She was manipulating the record to protect her own relationship and control the poet's image.
She was the gatekeeper. With the Aya root letters, she literally took scissors and cut out sections of her transcripts. Why? Because they showed a witty teenage Dickinson, and she preferred the solemn, tragic genius. This edition is a correction to that censorship.
Beyond fixing those cuts, the editors have also redated so much of the correspondence with a new precision. How on earth did they do that?
Well, dating is the key to meaning, right? It puts the letters back into a real-time conversation, and they used all this new contextual evidence, things the 1950s team just didn't have access to.
Like what specifically?
So they used local detailed records of Amherst weather patterns so they could date a reference to a specific snowstorm. They used new historical newspaper databases to match mentions of, say, a fire or an election. And they cross-referenced everything with the diaries of her siblings, Vinnie and Austin.
So a vague mention of an early frost could suddenly give you a precise date for a letter that used to just say circa 1870.
Exactly. And this precision led to what is maybe the biggest aha moment of the whole project. It's the resequencing of the famous exchange with Susan about the poem Safe in Their Alabaster Chambers.
Right, I always thought that was just a straightforward literary conversation. Susan gives feedback, Emily revises.
That was how it was presented, a sort of high-minded artistic debate. But the new dating changes everything. It reframes it as an active relationship repair after some emotional turbulence.
Okay, so walk us through what the new dating suggests.
It suggests the whole thing started with Dickinson's maybe lackluster response to the birth of Susan's son, Ned. She joked she'd only visit if Susan would shut him up in a coffee cup. Susan was apparently hurt and sent a note mentioning her sorrow. So Dickinson's next letter poem, Could I Then Shut the Door, followed by the intense revised Alabaster Chambers, looks like an apology. The poem becomes this profound way to repair the friendship, to reassure Susan of their deep connection.
That turns a dry literary debate into a deeply human moment. That's the power of this kind of detailed work.
It is. And just one final note on classification. The editors reevaluated all those little scraps and notes, what the 1958 edition called prose fragments. This edition reconceives many of them as writing notes. Material she was deliberately saving, copying onto pages like a poet's notebook. They weren't just random thoughts, they were material she was preserving for later use.
So when you put it all together, the impact of this new edition is just immense. Emily Dickinson is transformed from that secluded artist into a witty, complex, deeply engaged woman, connected to the personal, the political, the whole rhythm of her world.
And it's also a powerful reminder of how vulnerable this all is. It was common in the 19th century to destroy letters. Dickinson's sister Lavinia destroyed hundreds of letters she'd received. Friends reported burning hers. So this whole new edition, for all its science and scholarship, it still relies so heavily on those compromised transcriptions by Mabel Loomis Todd. It really shows you that a literary legacy can hang by a single fragile thread.
That's a sobering thought, and it leaves you with a final question. Knowing now how connected she was, that she was addressing people like Emerson and Stowe with the confidence of an equal, let's just imagine what insights, what opinions, what parts of her voice were in those hundreds of letters that were deliberately burned. The knowledge that we'll just never know, that a provocative thought for all of us to carry forward.